Capitalism has been at the center of economic prosperity and freedom for centuries. But when you hear names like Bernie Madoff or hear about the shenanigans of companies like Enron, well, capitalism can become a dirty word. Hello, I'm Eric Wright, along with Jeff Pearsall, and we're here today with TREP Talks to talk about some of the questions entrepreneurs are asking. And the question we're delving into today is, capitalism isn't a dirty word. Jeff, have greed and capitalism become, well, synonymous?
It's a great question, Eric. And what has really happened over the course of time is that capitalism has created so much temptation for people. And when left unchecked, that temptation will lend itself to greed and those opportunities of selfishness, when actually capitalism is supposed to be designed for that one thing and that one opportunity to really drive the opportunity of freedom for all people. And it's what made our country great, but today it is very confused by itself and its own definition.
You know, Jeff, it's almost like if we're not governed by some sort of internal compass, we're going to be forced to be governed by something on the outside that nobody really wants. So we coined this term ethical capitalism. Why don't you unpack that for us, Jeff? And how does it sort of address this problem that we're discussing?
Yeah, Eric, ethical capitalism by definition creates a method and a way in which capitalism can prosper. Ethical meaning, let's just do the right thing at the right time and at the right place. And capitalism being the difference between the private sector driving profit or the public sector driving profit. And in reality, you don't want the public sector driving profit. We already know what the end conclusion to that is.
Yes, gross inefficiency in most cases. Now, an essential to this whole principle of ethical capitalism is the idea of freedom.
Yep.
And so let's talk about freedom, and let's talk about the elements of freedom that impact each and every one of us.
Yeah, when you think about ethical capitalism, you got to go back and get to the root fundamental of what really drives all human beings. And it really doesn't matter if we're talking about terrorists or we're talking about business owners or we're talking a single mom at home. It's everybody. We're wired for freedom from birth, of all cultures, all genders, all sexes. And there's four components that really drive that, which is freedom of time, freedom of money, freedom of relationships, and freedom of purpose.
Okay. You know, and Jeff, I know that these things didn't come out of something that you read in a book. This idea of freedom came out of your own personal experience as an entrepreneur. And so maybe share a little bit of that journey with us, how this idea of freedom captured you and began to drive you as an entrepreneur.
Yeah, Eric, it really starts back in a summer around July 7th or 8th for me, when I was working for a gentleman, making more money than I'd ever made in my history. And this was about 15 years ago. And my daughter was between her junior and senior year and was in a head-on crash. And she was airlifted to the hospital, was there all night. And great thing, you know, there was no alcohol or anything like that involved. It was just the other driver fell asleep. And we get to the hospital. We finally get through the surgeries. I get on the phone with my boss the next morning, and it's about 7 a.m. And I go through this whole scenario, and he ends the conversation with, "Okay, Jeff, great. I guess I'll see you in an hour at the office."
You got to be kidding me.
And everything in me turned upside down.
Yeah.
And it was at that point, it became the passion to drive for that time freedom and for those relationship freedoms. And later it became, you know, the financial freedoms, which we'll talk about in other courses. And then of course the purpose freedom, which I think, so for me personally, it was all about the time and the relationship. And it was driven by an event, which can happen to any of us where it creates the trigger. It took me 8 to 9 months to break out of that confines of that relationship.
Right.
But boy, it's led to the last 14 years of great time freedom and relationship freedom.
Wow. You know, the main principles of ethical capitalism are discussed in our book, Dogs Don't Bark at Parked Cars. And as I was listening to you, Jeff, I was thinking about, two really key elements that you have discussed with me many times that are essential to this concept of freedom. Why don't you break those down for us, Jeff?
You can have all the drive and purpose that you want, and you could have all the desire for time, money, relationships, and purpose. But at the end of the day, if you don't have the faith and the courage to actually pursue it, you're going to end up missing it.
Right.
I always talk about the guy who sits on the couch and he's got all the desire, he's got all the reasons, he's got all the knowledge. But at the end of the day, he doesn't have the courage to get off the couch and go. And then you just got to have the faith in yourself, and you got to have the faith and the belief that your courage and those things that are important to you are worth it, and you deserve it. Too many people spend too much time in a process of actually battling against themselves than ever giving themselves the chance by just having the faith for the future.
Right, right. That's so good, Jeff. Now, what can the viewers that are watching here today do to help incorporate these principles of freedom and ethical capitalism into their life? I know one of them, Jeff and I wrote a book called Dogs Don't Bark at Parked Cars. It's available at Amazon. You can pick it up at your bookstore. And we work through in detail some of these principles. But Jeff, help our viewers have some takeaways on how they can incorporate ethical capitalism, particularly freedom, into their own life.
Yeah, I think very most importantly is to understand this sounds so easy. It's just do the right thing and let's drive this through the private sector with profit. But when you get down to the real final nut and grind of this whole thing, Eric, these decisions become very difficult. And the decisions you're making, somebody's always typically going to come out on the shorter end of the stick. And so people will look at you and go, you're unethical because that hurt me. Well, actually, what it did was it probably freed you up to go do what you're supposed to do.
Forced you to do what you need to do.
And that really starts the conversation, which is the first thing that everybody needs to do is define what freedom is for them in time, money, relationship, and purpose.
Gotcha.
Because if you don't write that down and define it, then you've got no idea, and you're kind of just being pushed by the wind. And you've really got to have a real clear track of that. And then you got to decide what price are you willing to pay to go achieve that freedom. And there's a lot of people that really say they want something, but they're not willing to put the effort and the desire toward achieving it.
Jeff, we have a statement that we often use that unethical is unsustainable. Yeah. That if you operate in an unethical way, eventually that is going to catch up to you. Eventually it's going to torpedo everything you're trying to do and everything you're trying to do.
And we got tons of examples.
Oh yeah, we could spend the rest of the day unpacking all of those. But by incorporating these solutions into your life, you're going to begin to gain freedom. And hopefully you're going to arrive at a place where you're driving your business instead of your business driving you, which is really the essence of freedom for an entrepreneur. And again, we'll talk about that more in some of our future TREP talks. So take the time, stop, don't wait. Write down what freedom means to you in these 4 terms that Jeff mentioned. Do it now. Also, you can go to our website, trepbiz.com. There you can get videos like this. You can get articles that Jeff and I have written so that you have help and assistance on your entrepreneurial journey. I want to again thank you for joining us for TREP Talks. For myself, Eric Wright, and my partner here, Jeff Pearsall, we look forward to continuing this discussion and further conversations.